As you recall, we talked about the interference pattern of information, which is the hologram. Remember that every speck of matter on the surface of this torus is sending out information about itself. Our galaxy does, and so does a galaxy and many other galaxies which have gone ahead of us. So that the information that is being sent out gets interwoven into one web of information about the entire structure. This is the information that one can tap in those higher states of consciousness and, in fact, enter the knowledge that's available about the entire structure, because we are a part of this hologram, that little sliver that still retains some of that information. And by tuning into the totality of the hologram, we can have the information about every part of it. And that's exactly what Ben did.
Now, as you're revolving, what happens is that slit opens up more and more and more. So you see more and more of that reality, and we assume that we see different realities.
Shortly after this interview, Itzhak Bentov set out on a decisive journey. He was traveling to California to present his latest experimental advances on accessing other realities. Japanese researchers interested in his work were scheduled to see his presentation. That meeting, however, never took place. On May 25, 1979, Bentov was a passenger on American Airlines Flight 191. Seconds after takeoff from Chicago O'Hare, the aircraft lost an engine and crashed, killing everyone on board. Among them, Itzhak Bentov. A fatal accident, or perhaps something more unsettling. Curiously, his research on consciousness and accessing other realities would later be used for years by the CIA in the Gateway process. Bentov was not just another mystic speaking about spirituality. What made his research truly compelling was his training as a physicist. He brought the study of consciousness and spirituality into the laboratory. He experimented, measured, and explored. In doing so, he built a bridge between physics and consciousness, blending science with the mysteries of the mind.
The nervous system is that thing that gives us the picture of our realities. Yeah. We don't see light which is beyond UV and beyond infrared. We hear only a limited scale of vibrations. In other words, all our senses are limited.
Ordinary people at this stage of evolution are not able to see.
Correct.
What is the nature of that reality which they're able to see?
Well, that is classified as a non-physical reality sometimes. At the physical level, we're separate, and there's this much distance between us. On the very highest level, which is the high spiritual level, we are basically overlapping completely. Everybody is overlapping everybody else. In other words, everything and everyone is everywhere. In other words, we've become omnipresent. This is a state of highly spiritual perfected beings, or gods, you mean.
Itzhak Bentov researched how the human nervous system, responsible for perceiving physical reality, is linked to the evolution of consciousness. One of the central themes of his study was Kundalini energy, a force described in Eastern traditions that rises through the spine, activating energy centers and expanding perception. Bentov explained that as this energy ascends, it harmonizes the body's frequencies into a state of resonance.
So that the evolution has been rushed up or hurried up?
Yeah.
Can we speed that up by doing it?
Yeah. Well, you use techniques which push the nervous system a lot faster than the normal evolutionary rate. Those techniques are available.
But the tragic accident did not take Bentov's knowledge with it. He left us two extraordinary books, Stalking the Wild Pendulum and a cosmic book on the mechanics of creation, and his wife, Mirtala, continued his work, ensuring that these treasures of knowledge would not be lost. Guided by Mirtala, we are about to step into the fascinating and mysterious world of Bentov, the scientist who explored the other side and created a map for navigating between realities. He saw the body as a system of oscillating mechanisms that, with the right techniques, can allow us to travel between dimensions and gain direct knowledge from the source. We also delve into his view of the universe as a hologram, a place where consciousness is constantly evolving.
We don't have souls, but it's just the other way around. A soul has us. So that is that thing that evolves, the permanent, eternal thing is the soul, and the body is a kind of disposable thing.
And so it's the soul which is experiencing evolution, and not our personality, not our physical existences.
That is, the soul is the repository of information that we gather during a lifetime.
Ben called himself a nuts and bolts man, a plumber. He was trained as a mechanical engineer, and somewhere along the way, he started meditating and his consciousness opened up. First of all, he saw reality as a hologram. It's a totality in which every part is related to every other part, and they're all interdependent. And this hologram he perceived as vibratory in nature. In other words, as he said, it's an off and on reality, and we are only part-time here. It's an oscillating field. And it may appear to us as a continuous reality, whereas in fact, it's like a film composed of separate frames. The physical reality, the manifest world, is only another expression of that reality, which is consciousness, or existence itself, aware of itself.
Itzhak Bentov firmly believed that the reality we experience, the physical reality, functions like a hologram. In a hologram, every part contains the information of the whole, and Bentov argued that the universe operates in the same way. This idea carries many implications, but the most important one is that what we perceive as reality may be nothing more than a projection. Ultimate reality would exist at another level, or even another dimension, one that we do not normally perceive. From this perspective, all knowledge already exists within each of us, even within every cell. This is how a hologram works, the whole reflected in every part. Such a model could explain phenomena like telepathy or quantum entanglement, where particles remain connected beyond space and time. It also sheds light on accounts from people who have reached higher states of consciousness, describing themselves as one with everything and claiming to access complete knowledge from within. According to Bentov, these experiences are glimpses of moving beyond the projection of reality and accessing a deeper level where the base reality already contains the entire projection. Bentov did not arrive at these insights through theory alone. He explored them experimentally through meditation and a series of experiments that we will examine next.
The mechanism in the physical body that perceives reality is the nervous system itself. So Ben has designed instruments to study these physiological changes that occur in the body when a certain energy rises through the spine. In the East, it's called Kundalini, or coiled serpent. It rises up the spine and awakens certain energies in the body, which allow perception to become broader, and the brain functions then on a different level. And this chart shows an experiment that he did with a subject sitting on a chair that had a device attached to it called ballistograph. The lower part of the chart shows the same individual in a state of deep meditation, which also means deep relaxation. And look what happened. The breathing is practically gone. It's a straight line. And what was a disrupted pattern of the heartbeat has turned into a regular sine wave. And looking at this as an engineer, Ben said, this is an effect of harmonization of all the frequencies within the body, and the body is now resonating like a tuned instrument.
The ballistograph allowed Bentov to gain a deeper understanding of the physiology behind certain states of consciousness and the mechanism by which Kundalini energy could be activated and rise. This device was capable of detecting the micro-vibrations of the body produced by each heartbeat. Although imperceptible to our senses, every time the heart pumps blood, it generates a small mechanical movement that travels throughout the body. The ballistograph recorded these oscillations with great precision, allowing researchers to observe how the body responds to different physiological and mental states. Through these measurements, Bentov made a key observation. During deep states of relaxation and meditation, breathing naturally began to slow down. At the same time, the heart rate decreased and began to synchronize with the breath. At that point, Bentov noticed that the body began to enter a shared frequency, close to 7 Hz. This frequency is especially significant. It falls within the theta brainwave range, 4 to 8 Hz, which is linked to deep relaxation, meditative states, heightened creativity, and subtle expansions of consciousness. Remarkably, it also matches the Earth's natural frequency, known as the Schumann resonance, hinting at a profound connection between the rhythms of our body and the planet itself. According to Bentov's model, this synchronization could trigger a process of sympathetic resonance in which different systems of the body begin to align to the same frequency, one after another, in a cascading effect. For Bentov, the key lay in sound, and at a deeper level, in vibration. Think about it. Shamans beating drums at precise rhythms to induce trance states, synchronized dances aligning body and mind, mantras sung collectively and repetitively. All these ancient traditions seem to recognize the same truth. Consciousness can be altered when the body is harmonized with specific frequencies. The pranayamas, the rhythmic breathing patterns, were essentially a sophisticated form of the same principle, a way to tune the nervous system, the heart, and the mind to a shared vibration.
And he came up with what he called the Kundalini syndrome model. In other words, when this energy in the spine rises, the harmony occurs where the vibration turns into the sine wave at 7 cycles per second, or 7 Hertz, as compared to the regular disrupted pattern. And as an engineer, he looked at the body in terms of vibrating systems or oscillators. And in this case, there are 5: the heart aorta system, the brain itself, a cavity in the brain which is filled with fluid, a ventricle, and then the brain itself, the sensory cortex, and then all this results in an electromagnetic field around the head. A system which comes into harmony within itself becomes more powerful than others, and it will entrain, this is another term he used, it will entrain or pull after itself a system that is out of harmony. So once this oscillator or resonating system comes into harmony, it will trigger the rest one after the other. It's a domino effect. So as the heart pumps blood through the aorta, and he called the aorta the biggest plumbing in the body. So it's a tremendous impact on the body, and it shakes the body so that it vibrates. It hits the bifurcation into the legs, and a certain plane wave is reflected up. The next pulse comes down, and the plane wave and the pulse clash, and it creates a disruption in the body. When the harmonious 7 Hertz vibration is set up, it seems that the heart and the lungs begin to talk to each other, and they begin to work in harmony, so that a pulse comes down and waits for the reflection to come up, and they both go up together, and then the next pulse comes down, and there is no clash occurring anymore, and the body goes into resonance, triggering the next oscillator, which is the brain. And looking at the head, again, from the point of view of engineering, it's a rigid box resting on a resilient column, which is the spine. What happens is, as the body goes up and down, the skull is vibrated, and the brain, which is a gel-like substance, is floating in a fluid, the cerebrospinal fluid, so that each time the body goes up, it's hitting the skull and then goes down, and so up and down it goes, and it creates a plane wave within the brain. The brain has a characteristic called piezoelectric, which means that when it's stimulated mechanically, it develops an electromagnetic field around it, which is this field right here eventually. So this is the second oscillator, which triggers the third. This is the fluid-filled cavity in the brain called ventricle. And due to this regular vibration of 7 cycles or 7 hertz per second, a standing wave is established in the ventricle, which again creates a very harmonious frequency. And this in turn triggers the sensory cortex. This is a cross-section of the brain, and this is a cross-section of the third ventricle filled with fluid. On top of the third ventricle is a drum-like surface with a bundle of nerve fiber crossing it, which connects the right and left brain hemispheres. And this is very important because as the fluid vibrates harmoniously, it activates this nerve fiber, and it harmonizes the 2 brain hemispheres. And we know that consciousness opens up when the synchronization of the functioning of the 2 hemispheres occurs. And then a certain current is established in the sensory cortex in the lobe of the brain. And as I said before, all this results in an electromagnetic field around the head, so that the head actually becomes an antenna capable of sending out and receiving information which it could not do otherwise. And in that state, higher perceptions become possible. And this was Ben's theory, that through the mechanism of Kundalini and the resonant state of the body, higher perceptions become available.
After understanding how Bentov and Mirtala described the human body as a set of resonant systems, an inevitable question arises. Is it possible to experience this for oneself? Bentov never left behind a fixed technique or a step-by-step method, and perhaps he did so intentionally. For him, the process was not about forcing anything, but about allowing the body to do what it already knows how to do. Enter coherence. According to his view, the first step is not to activate anything, but to reduce noise, to quiet the body, to remain still. The primary way to reach this state of stillness is through meditation. By remaining motionless and calming the mind, the body gradually begins to relax. Slow, steady breathing then acts like a metronome. Little by little, the heart rate, the nervous system, and brain activity start to synchronize. Eventually, the entire respiratory and cardiac system enters a kind of automatic mode. It sustains itself in a state of rest, operating at its most basic and efficient level. One could say that the goal is to allow the body to fall asleep while consciousness remains awake, clear, and attentive. At that point, you no longer control the breath. You stop being the body, and the mind moves beyond its limits. And it is from this state, according to Bentov, that perception begins to change. Consciousness is no longer anchored solely to the surface of movement, and instead starts to touch the deeper layers of reality. This is when we connect with something far more vast, when we cross the boundaries of this 3D reality and perception expands beyond illusion. when we make contact with the source that projects the hologram, where all answers reside and all information becomes available. There are more advanced techniques that can help intensify these processes, especially through breathing. Practices designed to mobilize energy within the body and promote the circulation of cerebrospinal fluid, such as ancient bandhas and pranayamas studied for millennia, or more contemporary methods, like those taught by Dr. Joe Dispenza. Even so, meditation remains an excellent starting point. Many of these breathing techniques, as well as yoga, are not aimed at the final state itself, but at preparing the body and the nervous system so that, in total stillness, these deep states of samadhi can arise naturally.
So, eventually, as this current continues, starts at the toe and goes up around the body, and it opens up certain energy centers in the body known as chakras. And eventually the current begins to go round and round, and its function is to clear the body of stress so that it can actually perceive higher realities. Another thing that happens is that this current or alignment goes also through the pleasure centers, so that actually a person in this state is in a state of bliss, and a yogi sitting in a cave in Himalayas is actually having a lot of fun.
Bentov referred to the Kundalini syndrome as the set of physical, energetic, and psychological sensations that many people experience when consciousness begins to expand. The nervous system entering into resonance with deeper levels of reality. But Bentov went further. He asked a crucial question. What is it that we actually begin to perceive when consciousness expands? This is where his vision takes a radical turn. According to Bentov, reality is not primarily made of solid matter, but of empty space, a dynamic vacuum filled with potential. Through the nervous system, our senses allow us to perceive only what is in motion, what oscillates. Everything else remains outside our field of perception.
We are dealing with two realities. One is this physical, solid reality, but the information about it is given us by our senses. So that is our subjective reality. So what is the objective physical reality? If we magnify the atom and zero in on the electron, and now we think now we will get the answer to what physical matter is. But if we analyze the electron, all we find is an oscillating electromagnetic field. There's no physical matter as such. So we think, well, maybe the nucleus will give us the answer. And we zero in on the nucleus, and we find that it too is only an electromagnetic oscillating field in the void, because between the nucleus and the electron and outside of them, there is nothing but void, the same void that fills in the interstellar space. If you took an actual pendulum and would swing it and attach a pin to it, and you would draw a piece of paper under it like this, it would describe a sine wave. Here the pendulum moved and stopped, moved and stopped. And reality really are the spaces between the points of rest. We perceive reality when there is motion. And reality is really nothing but oscillating fields in the void. And the reason I can touch this screen and I don't go through the floor is because my atoms, or the electrons of my atoms, are actually repelling the electrons of the floor. But if I would speed up my vibration, then I could very well go through the floor. Now, let us take a hypothetical situation where we are taking a wavelength, let's say a red photon, which has a very large amplitude. The distances between the points of rest are very far apart. And then we take the same, let's say 1 inch, in other words, the same unit of frequencies, and we speed them up so that within the same length we have many more ups and downs. And let's say it's a violet photon, And then the points of rest get a little closer together, but we get more of them within that span. Then we speed it up even more. Let's say the gamma rays or X-rays. And we see that we get even more spikes and or waves, and they get even closer together. Now, let us imagine a hypothetical situation where the speed has become so fast that it's become infinite. At infinite speed, there will be no more oscillation, and the points of rest will in fact overlap, and you would get a straight line. Now, what kind of state would that be? First of all, we see that it's a paradox because the infinite speed now has become total rest. We could probably call it the state of the absolute. It's the source out of which all the frequencies arise. And it will also have the maximum energy. All energy is in it, but it's all in a potential state. And when it begins to vibrate, then it creates all these different frequencies which begin to interact, as we saw before, creating our reality. So one could summarize this by saying the absolute is the point where extremes merge, and a state of rest implies infinite speed. In fact, they become one and the same. And this state, the absolute state, is the substrate for all reality which emerges out of it.
Like a pendulum, we constantly oscillate between movement and rest, which according to Bentov occurs approximately 14 times per second, or in other words, at 7 Hertz. In movement resides our physical and perceivable reality, while in moments of rest is where the absolute exists. This process happens so quickly that we are not aware of when it occurs. We perceive ourselves only in this material reality without being conscious of the moments we inhabit in rest. However, if we manage to position our consciousness in these moments of rest and expand them, we can truly experience them, transcending the boundaries of the material world and expanding subjective time. This can be accomplished through techniques such as meditation. This is precisely what Bentov managed to do: explore those other realities, bring back the information obtained in those states, and share it. When a person becomes aware of those moments when the pendulum stops, when all movement ceases, consciousness expands and the perception of time changes. Those who have gone through these experiences often describe that time seems to stop, or at least slow down.
If this is our solid reality, and like a pendulum, we oscillate and we take off every now and then, and we touch that absolute state of total rest, but it happens so fast that we're not even aware of it, and we come back as if nothing had happened. But suppose we can expand that state and experience it, and in fact we can, then this is what will happen. Here is our reality, and here is the other reality, which we now have expanded, and we can be conscious on that level simultaneously with this level, so that we can actually have the benefit of both, and we can explore that reality and bring back the information. And this is in fact what Ben did, and the information that I will be talking about from now on was received in those states of expanded consciousness. Usually in those states of expanded consciousness, there is a different perception of time. People who come out of those states usually say, time has stopped, or at least it's slowed down. What is happening here? And to put it in some kind of perspective, Ben designed this diagram. This is our time-space, and this is the now moment where they cross, which is going from the past into the future, the eternal now moment. And We can project 1 second on it, 2 seconds on it, and so forth. It's very reliable, and we can measure it, and we can catch trains on time and be to work on time and so forth. However, superimposed on that are two other vectors of space-time, which are our subjective space-time. And usually they overlap, and we don't even know the difference. But in altered states of consciousness, there is a deviation, and the angle of deviation actually determines the depth of that state. And look what happens. If we project 1 second, we see that now in this position of the subjective time, we have 2 seconds for 1 objective second, which means that our time has already doubled. Now visualize the situation where the subjective time tilts more and more and more, where it practically becomes parallel with objective space. And this is what it would look like. Our subjective time is now overlapping objective space. What kind of situation would that be? Well, it would take no time to go anywhere, because you are everywhere at once, because your subjective time has overlapped objective space and it's become infinite. This would be the state of samadhi, the ultimate expansion of consciousness, in which your consciousness fills the entire universe.
Bentov developed a truly peculiar and fun technique to observe our ability to expand subjective time. I will now describe it as it appears in his book. First, place a clock in front of you. Relax and observe the clock while following the second hand. Absorb and remember the rhythm with which it moves, doing so effortlessly. Then, close your eyes and visualize yourself participating in your favorite activity. This visualization must be perfect. If you imagine lying on a beach, you must feel that you are really there. Don't just think you're on the beach. Feel the warmth of the sun and the texture of the sand. The results are better if you choose a relaxing activity instead of a hectic one. When you feel you have stabilized this visualization, slowly open your eyes a little. Don't focus on the clock. Just let your gaze settle on the face as if you were an uninterested observer of the entire situation. If you followed the instructions correctly, you may notice that the second hand stops at some moments, slows down, and stays in place. If you are very successful, you could stop the hand for a considerable time. For some people, this turns out to be a surprising experience. At the moment they feel that surprise, the hand accelerates and resumes its normal speed. To achieve results, one must really maintain their attention and mental presence in visualizing the experience, while at the same time observing the clock dispassionately. It would be somewhat similar to when you are reading a book and your mind has wandered off to some issue, but you continue reading, a kind of division in consciousness. I would like to read in the comments if you have tried the practice and if you have managed to stop or slow down time. Why did the clock slow down or stop? Bentov proposes that the observing mind, responsible for interpreting the information received by the brain, was absent. While the sensory organs processed the information, the observer had disconnected, leaving the body without someone to interpret what the eyes were seeing. It is possible that during that time, the observer was elsewhere, like on a distant beach, and while focusing on what was happening there, could not process the information from the clock. When consciousness returned to the body, the clock would return to functioning normally. If the body is a system of resonant oscillators and consciousness emerges from coherence, then the exploration does not happen outwardly, but inwardly, in silence, in stillness, in those moments when movement fades and something deeper begins to reveal itself. That what we now call mystical states may, in fact, be natural modes of human functioning, forgotten but not lost.
It's a hologram of sound or a hologram of different frequencies that begin to create all kinds of harmonics. Then you ask, so who is the top God? Who runs this structure? And suddenly a brilliant light comes down on you, and you're shaking because now you realize you are talking to the ultimate God of the structure. And you begin to ascend, and you go faster and faster. And in fact, you begin to tumble down faster and faster. And then you realize that it's making a U-turn. And at the end, there is something there. And you know that that is it. And you will soon be confronting the God of manifest creation. As you finally look at it, you realize that you are looking at yourself.
In a previous video, we explored Itzhak Bentov's research on how the body and the nervous system could enter states of resonance capable of altering the perception of time and space. But that was only the first part, the technical part. What remained pending was something much deeper. What Bentov understood when accessing those states. What vision of the universe emerged from those experiences. What he understood about consciousness, about God, and about our role within all of this. Bentov began to wonder whether altered states were not mere hallucinations, but phenomena measurable from physics. Whether the brain could enter into resonance, whether the body could oscillate like a vibratory system, and whether that resonance allowed access to different levels of perception.
Okay, so now, before you were talking about the people who were the mutants, either being in the mental hospitals or being geniuses.
Yeah.
These are people who have expanded perception, and hence they can see a reality which ordinary people at this stage of evolution are not able to see.
Correct.
What is the nature of that reality which they're able to see?
Well, that is classified as a non-physical reality sometimes. We can take an example, say, well, let's take a simple example. A family sitting at dinner table, and say there's a kid, maybe 15 years old, 16 years old, and he looks up and suddenly he says to his mother, "Hey, Ma, look at, there's our dead grandmother is standing in the corner." Mother looks around, says, "No, oh, there's no." And then psychiatrist says, "Oh, young fella, you're in troubles," and then he writes out a little prescription for a little Thorazine or electroshock or whatever, and pretty soon, in a matter of 2 weeks, kid is back in shape, very normal.
No longer sees the
No longer sees anything.
Yeah.
So the process has been reversed. This is called a psychotic episode or acute schizophrenic break or whatever it is.
And what you would say is that there's a good chance that that kid is seen.
Very good chance that the kid has a spontaneous opening of his senses.
So that the evolution has been rushed up or hurried up?
Yeah. Now, this actually happens. There are techniques to do this. But the Eastern people, the yogis, have developed systems to do this, to push the nervous system rapidly.
As you recall, we talked about the interference pattern of information, which is the hologram. Remember that every speck of matter on the surface of this torus is sending out information about itself. Our galaxy does, and so does a galaxy and many other galaxies which have gone ahead of us. So that the information that is being sent out gets interwoven into one web of information about the entire structure. This is the information that one can tap in those higher states of consciousness and, in fact, enter the knowledge that's available about the entire structure, because we are a part of this hologram, that little sliver that still retains some of that information. And by tuning into the totality of the hologram, we can have the information about every part of it. And that's exactly what Ben did.
What Mirtala is presenting here is one of the central pieces of Itzhak Bentov's thought. his vision of the universe as a hologram. In physical terms, a hologram is generated from a plate that contains the complete information of an image. When a beam of coherent light, such as a laser, strikes that plate, the encoded information is projected in 3 dimensions. But there is an even more unsettling characteristic. In a hologram, each fragment contains the entirety of the image. If you divide the plate, each part still displays the whole. The implications of this are astonishing, because if the universe functions as a hologram, as various researchers and scientists have suggested in different contexts, then each part would contain the information of the whole. And that includes us, each cell, each neuron, each point of consciousness. Under this perspective, accessing altered states would not be escaping reality, but penetrating more deeply into its informational structure. Bentov maintained that, by entering certain states of resonance, consciousness could tune into that more fundamental level. He did not describe it as a mystical fantasy. He described it as a connection with the source of the projection. From there, according to his interpretation, it would not only be possible to intuit the vibrational composition of the universe, but to glimpse the very process of creation itself, even the very nature of God, as we will see later.
So this would be the structure then. This is the core of the structure, which is called torus, T-O-R-U-S. Now, if we equate matter with consciousness, and as I said before, there is nothing but consciousness, and matter is only a form in which consciousness appears. This would be the core of that torus structure. The white hole through which energy emerges, condenses, becomes matter, goes around, gets pulled back into the black hole. And between them is what might be called the singularity point. In physics, it's a situation where laws no longer apply. And here, a transmutation occurs of matter that has condensed to an extreme, and it becomes energy again to reemerge as a new universe. So here is our white hole and black hole and matter circulating round and around. In the center, it's hollow, and it's an electromagnetic field. And we could say that this interference pattern of information could be called the universal mind hologram. The torus is a distilling column of consciousness, that this structure actually is refining consciousness, which is equivalent to matter, as matter is recirculated through this black and white hole.
In this part of the presentation, Mirtala describes one of Itzhak Bentov's deepest intuitions, the vision of the universe as a dynamic toroid, a field closed in on itself, where at the center 2 complementary poles would coexist, a black hole and a white hole. For Bentov, this was not merely a symbolic image, it was a functional structure. He began from a very ancient idea, as above, so below. The notion that the macro and the micro reflect one another. Observing the subatomic models available in his time, he interpreted that even in fundamental particles, such as quarks, there appeared dynamics of emission, impulses, jets of energy projected in a particular direction. From his perspective, this dynamic was fractal. What happens at the microscopic scale could be reflected at the cosmic scale, and so he reinterpreted the Big Bang, not as a single isolated event in the past, but as part of a continuous cycle. The great initial explosion would be, in this model, the manifestation of a white hole, the release of information and energy that had previously been absorbed by a black hole. A process of compression and expansion, of birth, development, and reabsorption, a cycle, matter emerging, organizing, evolving, and finally returning to the point of origin to begin the process again. For Bentov, the entire universe would function in this way, like an organism, like a cosmic breath. But there is something even more interesting. All of that cycle would be subject to time. And time, in his interpretation, would not be something absolute, but an internal property of the system, mass in motion within the toroid. In other words, time would be valid within the structure, but outside of it, the rules would change. Bentov spoke of a holographic universal mind, a broader level where this entire cycle would not be sequential, but simultaneous, where past, present, and future would not be separated, but contained within a single totality. From that external perspective, what we experience as a timeline would be only a section of the hologram. And outside that toroid, according to his interpretation, the limitations of time would be annulled. All information would be available, anywhere, at any moment. Accessing that level would not mean traveling physically. It would mean shifting the perceptual frame. And that, precisely, is what Bentov believed he had experienced. A momentary connection with that level where the entire cycle can be observed as a whole.
So now we will look at Ben's personal experience through those higher levels of creation. On that journey into the expanded states of consciousness, it's like a guided tour. You can ask questions and you get answers, and once you understand and you say, okay, I got it, the slide changes, the page is turned, and you're shown new things. In the vastness of the dark void, a certain part becomes activated. This is where action will take place. And a light describes a certain territory. He called it proto-matter. This is a matrix which will be eventually filled with matter, like the Chinese checkers, which get filled with those little marbles. And this field begins to polarize. As we saw before, the field, the ultimate field of the absolute, which the void is reconciling the opposites. So the opposites of the plus and minus are together. So they begin to separate, and it's like unscrambling scrambled eggs. And the tension is enormous because they don't really want to be separated and they want to come back together again. But this is what creates the dynamics of manifest creation, because you need the polarization in order for action to occur.
What Bentov began to understand in those expanded states was not just a symbolic vision. It was a principle that appears again and again in ancient traditions, esoteric philosophies, and also in modern physics. Polarity. As stated in the Kybalion, everything is dual, everything has two poles, everything has its pair of opposites. Bentov saw that, before manifestation, everything was unified, an absolute field, a full void, a totality without division. But for something to be able to manifest, that unity must bifurcate. The single source divides into two complementary aspects, not enemies, not contradictory, but poles of the same reality, positive and negative, light and darkness, expansion and contraction. That separation generates tension. Imagine that something that was perfectly united separates into two halves. Both still belong to the same origin, but now they are experienced as incomplete, and that incompleteness generates impulse. It is like the tension between two poles of a battery. Without a difference in potential, there is no current. It is like the bow of a violin. Without tension in the string, there is no sound. It is like personal growth. Without difficulty, there is no overcoming. Tension is not an error of the system. It is the engine of the system. Bentov understood that manifest creation is born precisely from that polarization. Separation creates dynamics. Dynamics create movement. Movement creates time, form, matter.
This center here, the black-white hole, is the consciousness that has the blueprint for this structure, and it's learning through the interaction of its parts, through all the particles that go around and get refined, and their consciousness is getting higher and higher each time around. This point grows in the process, it evolves. And what would you call a consciousness that is in charge of the universe? What is a consciousness whose body the universe is? And as Ben said, well, you would call it a creator. And so the moment you ask, again, the next picture is shown to you and explained. And what you see are more such luminous toroidal shapes appearing in the void. And as you approach, you see that they are arranged in a spiral, 7 universes per each rung of the spiral. This seems like a lot to take in at first, and you begin to count and you realize that there are 7 rungs to the spiral, which means that there are 49 universes. And on top of that structure, there appears to be a very luminous something, and as you approach it closer, this brilliant white light seems to have a shape such as this. And Ben, being familiar with the Hebrew language, looked at that and he said, no, I must be programming myself. This looks like the Hebrew letter Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And immediately the explanation comes. No, this is not a Hebrew letter. This is an interference pattern of 4 energies interacting on this level, on this cosmic level. And they create this pattern, which is a consciousness whose body this is. This consciousness contains the consciousnesses of all the 49 creators. In other words, consciousness is modular.
When Bentov saw that luminous form at the apex of the structure, his mind did something very human. It tried to interpret it through what was familiar. It reminded him of the letter Aleph, the first letter of the Hebrew alphabet, and he thought that perhaps he was self-suggesting. But the understanding that came to him was different. It was not a letter. It was an interference pattern. A pattern generated by the interaction of 4 primordial energies at that cosmic level. The form was not a cultural symbol, it was a real configuration of forces, and the coincidence with Aleph did not mean that he was projecting, but rather that those who structured that alphabet may also have accessed that same level of information. For this reason, within Jewish mystical tradition, Hebrew is considered a revealed language, not invented in the conventional sense, but discovered. In Kabbalah, it is maintained that the letters are not simple arbitrary signs, but channels or structures through which creation is articulated. From this perspective, Aleph would not be merely the first letter. It would be the geometric imprint of a primordial frequency. And that frequency, that conscious interference pattern, would be responsible for all the creation beneath it. Not as an anthropomorphic God, but as an organizing principle, a precise combination of qualities that, through interaction, generate universes. There is another detail that powerfully draws attention. 7 levels, 7 universes per level, 49 in total. This scheme resonates with other traditional maps of consciousness. In the yogic tradition, there are 7 chakras, centers that range from the densest and most material states to progressively subtler ones, culminating in the crown, where individual consciousness merges with the source. An ascent through levels of refinement. A certain connection can also be observed with the Gnostic texts discovered in Nag Hammadi. There it is narrated how Sophia, one of the aeons, emanations of the pleroma and bearer of the divine spark, descends outside the harmonious order through an impulse toward direct knowledge. From that rupture emerges Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, a consciousness ignorant of the original fullness, perceiving itself as the sole principle. From that ignorance, he creates the material cosmos and generates 7 archons, often symbolically associated with the 7 classical planets. 7 intelligences structuring a tiered cosmos, a system of spheres that organizes and at the same time limits the experience of embodied consciousness. Different traditions, different languages, but the same structural pattern.
So he had no explanations for these except that he was seeing something and then asking questions. So as he approached this Aleph a little closer, what he saw was that the front of it was a brilliant white light and the back was dark and it looked rather three-dimensional. It's a hologram. And there are 22 such forms, interference patterns emerging from the luminous side, and they look exactly like the Hebrew letters. And he was explained again that these are interference patterns that were observed by seers in antiquity, and they incorporated them into the Hebrew letters, into the Hebrew alphabet, but they are there objectively to be observed. On the other side, the same forms emerge, but in a random, mixed-up order. And he was explained that these interference patterns are transducers of the Aleph energy down to the physical level. They step it down further and further to the physical level. And this whole diagram actually illustrates the law of the cosmic level, because what it's really saying that evil is simply ignorance of the law. The proper sequence of these characters is knowledge of the law, but a mixed up order is ignorance of the law, which then becomes evil. And what is the law? And when you ask the question, you're shown. Close up, this is the structure. The Aleph breaks itself down into 3 centers, 3 chakras, each one having these interference patterns in them, which look like Hebrew letters, and each Hebrew letter has an equivalent numerical value, so that everything is actually modular and structured. When Ben looked at that, he realized that the white light of the Aleph, representing wisdom, is a combination of all these colors. And these are actually frequencies active on that level which create these holograms. Now, the law that we talked about before, the cosmic law operative on this level, is interpreted in a very ingenious way. These characters, which then became the Hebrew language, can be read in different directions and mean opposite things. If you read from left to right, it reads Heilech, which means go, or it's a green light. In other words, you can act safely if you act from love towards will. But if you act from will to love, self-will, before you know love, then it reads klaya. And in Hebrew, it means destruction or extinction. So that is the cosmic law. The cosmic law is love, and the ignorance of the cosmic law then causes destruction.
These patterns, these forms we know as Hebrew letters, act as transducers, gradually modulating primordial energy until it can manifest in the physical world. Pure energy cannot become matter without structure and translation. Order represents knowledge of the law. Disorder represents ignorance. And this ignorance is what is called evil here, not as an external force, but as a misalignment with the architecture of reality. When the sequence is maintained, there is coherence. When it is broken, friction appears, and friction produces destruction. At the core of the structure represented by the Aleph, there are 3 centers: love, will, and creation. The original white light is not a single frequency, but the harmonic integration of all frequencies, like white light passing through a prism. Love is the organizing principle. Will is the force that directs energy. Creation is the result. When will arises from love, creation flows naturally. But when will acts without love, the ego appears, the sense of separation that tries to impose reality from scarcity and fear, generating resistance. This connects with modern mysticism and manifestation psychology, such as the teachings of Neville Goddard. Creation does not arise from desperate desire, but from the inner conviction that the desire is already fulfilled. It is not about pursuing reality. It is about inhabiting it internally first. Act from the emotional state of the wish already fulfilled, from peace, certainty, and fullness. Not from lack, but from coherence. And if you think about it, this is not only metaphysical, it is deeply human. Acting from ego before understanding generates conflict. Acting from inner coherence generates construction. What Bentov saw was not only a map of the universe, it was a map of the behavior of consciousness. And that is what makes his experience not merely mystical, but radically applicable.
Having seen this and the current constantly circulating around this, you want to break out and you want to see what's beyond that. But you keep bumping into this wall and you can't get out. When finally you do break through, this is what you see. You are surrounded by more cosmoses, and they're pressing against each other like frogs' eggs. And you're caught in this structure. It looks like a biological structure. Once you break out of that soup of cosmoses, you discover that they are contained in turn in a yet larger sphere, so that one structure is within another. You see that this is a growing, almost biological structure. So, as you go through all these levels, finally, you come to a level where all these levels are contained in one sphere, the manifest creation. Everything visible and invisible, everything that ever existed is in it. And around it is this infinite dark void, which is the consciousness itself. And as it vibrates, as we saw before, it creates manifest creation. So as you come closer to this, you begin to discern what appear to be rotating disks covering its surface. And as you look closer, this is what you see. Instead of disks, you see that these are bars having little shapes underneath like that, and these bars spin around. These shapes spin around. And there are 3 layers of these, and the 4th, the outermost layer, looks like this. And you begin to recognize these as shapes known as the Sanskrit letters, and then this one as the symbol which stands for Om, or cosmic consciousness in Sanskrit. So again, you're explained when you ask about it, these are not Sanskrit letters. These are holograms, interference patterns that are active on that level, and they were perceived by the seers and incorporated into the Sanskrit alphabet. So, as you look at this manifest creation, you realize that there must be a consciousness that runs this, the ultimate consciousness. And you want to understand how this structure is run and what's happening with these rotating disks. And you are explained that as this cell or as this being grows, and we saw that it's constantly expanding and developing and evolving, it expands into the surrounding void, which is pure consciousness, as we remember, so that as it expands into it, the void begins to penetrate it. And these rotating disks are acting as modulators of the void. And by rotating, they create a sound, the word of creation, which then begins to interact within itself. It's a hologram of sound, or a hologram of different frequencies that begin to create all kinds of harmonics, all kinds of additional sounds that develop out of these interactions of different frequencies. And so the whole thing is forever evolving. So then you ask, so who is the top God? Who runs this structure? And the moment you ask, you find yourself in the infinite void, and suddenly a brilliant light comes down on you, so brilliant that you're blinded and you're shaking, because now you realize you are talking to the ultimate God of the structure. So what do? You peek under and you realize that this is a tunnel of light. So you enter that and you begin to ascend, and you go faster and faster. And in fact, you begin to tumble down faster and faster. And then you realize that it's making a U-turn. And at the end, there is something there. And you know that that is it. And you will soon be confronting the God of manifest creation. As you finally look at it, you realize that you are looking at yourself, a carbon copy of yourself. But that self sits there paying no attention to you, and you're lost. You don't know what to say to yourself. How's the weather up there? What do you say to yourself? So, you revert to your old tested trick. You merge with yourself, so that by merging, you can know yourself and you can find out what it's all about. So, you turn around and you slowly back into yourself like into a tight garage. And when you finally do, what happens is that there is a tremendous bang and you become the void. Because you are the consciousness, which is the void. And that part of you that had never left has always been the void. And that observer that was watching through your eyes and guiding you through this obstacle course to go back to yourself, your higher self, was the observer that had never left and was watching you creating this whole phantasmagoria for yourself. We each create our own. And it's just a trip back home to reunite with your own self. And so we could say that we are the creators, the producers, and the consumers of our own reality, because we are the consciousness itself.
And then the journey reaches its culminating point. After passing through structures within structures, cosmos contained within other cosmos, spheres expanding like living cells, universes spinning like biological spirals, there comes a moment when there are no more levels to traverse. Everything manifested, the visible and the invisible, everything that has existed and will exist, appears contained within a single sphere, and around it, the void, an infinite, dark, silent void. But it is not a dead void. It is consciousness. That darkness vibrates, and in vibrating, it generates light. And the light organizes itself into forms, frequencies, universes, matter, life. Everything Bentov has traveled through, the toroids, the spirals, the letters as interference patterns, order and chaos, love as law, are nothing more than modulations of that primordial consciousness. And at the end of the journey, that which appears to be the God of creation has a face. your face, not as a poetic metaphor, as identity. The final observer, the ultimate architect, the intelligence that guides the journey, is the same one that has been looking through your eyes from the beginning. That part which never left the void. That silent presence that has been observing the entire play while pretending to forget itself. Bentov then understands that the journey was not upward, but inward. It was not an ascension toward a separate being, but a return to the consciousness that has always been. Consciousness experiencing itself from infinite angles, creating worlds in order to contemplate itself, fragmenting into perspectives in order to rediscover its unity. We are the creators, the actors, and the spectators. We are the source and the form. We are the void that vibrates, and the vibration that becomes the universe. And the spiritual journey in the end is nothing more than this: a return home. A return to the one who never left. I hope you have enjoyed this journey, this cosmic exploration of consciousness. If Bentov's vision and Mirtala's sublime exposition have resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments and learn what it has awakened within you. Thank you very much for watching until the end. See you soon.